wonderful set of speakers for you today. I'm going to interview Maria from Ask a Matchmaker and Agape Match. So just a bit of housekeeping. This is put on by the Internet Dating Excellence Association. You're very welcome to join. All leaders of online dating companies are very welcome. Thanks also to our sponsor, Dating Through Curiosity, who has made this event possible. And also Cortland Brooks, which is my little agency and consultancy, which is focused on serving online dating companies. Maria is the founder of Agape Match and is the host of the podcast Ask a Matchmaker, and has been a top flight matchmaker in New York for 16 years at this point. But that's your history actually goes back even further as a matchmaker. So welcome, Maria. It's great to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I want to thank you, first of all, for keeping me company on 2 flights. I flew back from New York from the Global Love Conference and then flew back from London to UK, and it was 10 hours in all. I managed to listen to your book. And you did a wonderful job of reading. I must say, you really, there's definitely, given the choice of reading and listening, this is a book you want to listen to. So just want to.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Mark.
Wonderful. So why don't we open up with your family's involvement in matchmaking? As I said, you go further back even than 16 years.
It's funny because when this question only comes up with people that are like not Greek or not Indian, because in the Greek community of which I belong to, they never talk about my grandparents because we all have grandparents that were matchmakers. Matchmaking was just the way you met people before 1980. So in the book, it's very much a prescriptive memoir that has dating advice pumped in. And I talk about the history of dating in the States, but then I do pivot and talk about my heritage of dating and like what that looks like in a different country that had a, very different way of going about introducing kids. And so, yes, I'm 4th generation. Yes, my grandmother, her mother, and her grandmother, they were all matchmakers, but there were matchmakers in every village. Of course, we're also like parental matchmaking at work, but you would hire a matchmaker, I'm using that word loosely now. You would call on a matchmaker to help negotiate the dowries and also tell you if that's like a good match. Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because what my grandmother did and what I do are 100% different. There's nothing that I could, maybe one thing, but everything else, there's nothing that applies to what I do because, she was setting up people in a homogenous society. So everyone was the same race, ethnicity, religion. Everybody was straight, as far as she knew. I don't know if they had, that sort of, I'm sure they had that language. It's Greece. We invented being gay, but, it was just a heteronormative society. And, she also, her and her mother, they did it at a time when, war was rampant. Famine was there. And so, marriage was very much seen as a tool as it has been seen as a tool for millennia to create alliances between families, to create these like microeconomies so that mm-hmm. people can survive. Mm-hmm. What I do in Manhattan is insanely different.
It's very interesting just thinking about like what role do parents and grandparents play in terms of matchmaking in a community mm-hmm. and how that compares to the matchmaker's role. Because it almost seems like there's something missing in modern society as we kind of moved away a little bit further from family. We move away physically. We don't have that connection that our parents and our grandparents and certainly 3 generations back would have done. That with dependence came the community called family, and many of us move into our new cities and we lose these connections and we lose the benefit, really, certainly as single people. So in some ways it seems like maybe the matchmaker's role is to make up for this gap. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I suppose that the whole de-evolution of how we meet is not just because of dating apps. It's also because of the technology that exists for us to travel, right? So of course people are moving away because they think, I can visit my mom or my dad, once a season because we have, airplanes. There was a time when going from, New York City to Los Angeles, that would have been someone's entire lifetime. And, now it's 2/3 of my audiobook and you're there, right? So, certainly the way we create community has changed. But in the matchmaker role, like what I feel like I do is I, one, acknowledge my client's loneliness or inability to use perhaps the modern dating tools that exist to help them get into a relationship. But I also think it's my job to create community. I think any matchmaker that I know, we know how to pull up seats into our table. That's our job, right? Is to constantly be meeting new people, adding more people into a Rolodex, not just single people, but like the network of where we can look for people, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because yesterday I was talking to a colleague of mine who lives down in Savannah. And she said, she was just telling a client that I have access to 400 matchmakers as part of the trade association that we all belong to. And as a result, I have access to essentially 400 databases and 400 people's networks because I talk to these people. I go to conferences. So if I ever have a question, if I ever need a match, I can access that. And I think, that is the table, right? That is what you're doing. So I think really great matchmakers tend to be quite collaborative, not just professional matchmaking, but even in their own communities. It's not enough to send out an email. You have to show up to different festivals, know what's happening. It's all these other things that come along with being not necessarily extroverted, but being a social person in the community and honoring that community.
Yeah. Yeah. And certainly one of the impressions I've had from going to the Global Love Conference over, just a couple, last week, but
Mhm.
even in the past, 160 matchmakers came to the Global Love Conference, and there was a true spirit of collaboration and sharing and wanting to talk to each other. Very high charisma room, and I think when a lot of this room is online dating app focused, and I'm sure in the back of the minds of executives at dating companies are thinking, okay, matchmaking, why matchmaking? How is this superior for such a different price point to what we're providing? We're providing inventory, we're providing people. So, how would you define, the key problem I've always thought about matchmaking is having the choice. But what you're saying and what I've observed from the conference is that matchmakers do work together, and that's how you solve for that problem. You do work together, and you do share notes, and you kind of bubble up people within the communities that you work with that are good matches. What else? What else is it about matchmaking that you would say is vastly superior to, why will people spend orders of magnitude more for a matchmaker versus using an online dating app? What's the point at which someone should use a matchmaker?
I just want to clarify to anyone listening that this is not in my book.
Yeah, no.
I don't think matchmaking is for anyone or
Mhm.
everyone. I think, matchmaking is a solution for some people who would like to have, high touch experience in meeting new people. If you're the kind of person who is working long hours, just doesn't have time to swipe and experiencing dating fatigue from all that, or if you're the kind of person who's very private and you can't participate in online dating, and maybe your circle is made up of a lot of people that you just can't date. Maybe, like I know plenty of people who will work in environments where everyone's the same gender, but they're not, they're not attracted to that gender. They're attracted to the opposite gender. So what I think matchmaking can do is just create just more opportunities to have someone else look under the hood and do that. But in the book, I while I do talk about being a matchmaker and like what has happened to my clients, I advocate that, there's a way for you to be your own matchmaker. And I try to weave in like how to meet people in real life and understanding like, the United States culture is really different than European culture. The reasons why people are single in the US are extremely different than the reasons why people are single in Europe. So for instance, in Europe, and I'll just speak about like Southern Europe because I'm more experienced with that. But for instance, Greece has an incredibly low birth rate right now. I think it might be the lowest in all of Europe or bottom three. And it's really, and at the same time, we are also exporting a lot of people out, right? In the sense, what I mean by that is that we have an extreme brain drain. So, there to go to college, to become an engineer, to become a doctor, like it's free to go to these incredible universities. that the government is paying for, but then they don't get to keep the fruit of that labor, because then, a German hospital or a British engineering firm will come and poach those students out of a really good system that has helped educate these kids. So as a result, like in Greece, the reason why you have extremely low wages, you have a really depressed society. And as a result, there are less people having kids because they cannot afford to have kids. They still have maintained a very similar form of connection, though, that existed 20 years ago, despite online dating existing. A really popular way to date in Europe, for instance, is when you go out with friends, you're going to tag all your friends on your Instagram photo, your Facebook photo, and then your other friends will go through your photos, go through the tags and be like, is this person single? Is this person single? And that is very similar. That method is very similar to how my parents met in 1981, right? So just kind of thinking that for a second, in the United States, the reason why we are really single here is because we're living in really different realities. It's not just the politics. It's also this very individualistic way that we have built society. So I talk about this in my book in depth, but after World War II, there was this promotion and encouragement of the nuclear family that did not exist in Europe, right? And because of that promotion, because then we started building highways. I mean, the mass exodus out of the cities in the 60s, right after, the civil rights unrest and all that stuff, that created these like really interesting highway silos into suburbia. And what essentially happened was that we were told, or the people of those decades were told, you're going to have a nuclear family, but then you're going to launch the nuclear families of tomorrow. So here's like a really quick thought exercise. Mm-hmm. When you meet a 27-year-old man in Greece and he tells you who lived with his mom, you're like, yeah, okay, that's normal. Congrats. Like, you're literally 99% of the population. You don't think negative thoughts about them. You just assume that they live with their mom. They see their grandparents every day. There's unannounced visitors at that house. There's a community. But if you meet a 27 or 29-year-old man in the States who lives with their mom, everyone in that equation looks like a failure. Their parents look like a failures. The son looks like a failure, right? And that is because you didn't launch, failure to launch. I mean, there's so many movies and pop culture and images of this on TV of you're still at home. And there's a lot of benefits this is going to sound like I'm advocating that men should stay home, and maybe they should, because then they have access to this community instead of living with roommates that they hate. But anyway, this is said a lot better in my book, but I do want to say that, like, the reasons why we're single here and the reasons why we're having like this loneliness epidemic, it's very one-sided in the United States, A. Mm-hmm. And B, we're all living in different realities. And I think that as a matchmaker now has become the hardest point to match people on. When I started 16, 17 years ago, I didn't have to think about how people can be moderate. I didn't have to think about politics. Yes, there are things that are political, sure, in 2008, 2009, but no one was telling me if they voted for McCain, I'm not interested, right? But in 2016, everything changed. And in fact, I'm quoted in the New York Times back in 2016 saying, I can't wait for this election to be over because I'm tired of people talking about Trump in my office. So stupid. I was so naive about what was about to happen, right? And sure enough, that, the biggest deal breaker became the Trump deal breaker. It started with Trump supporters telling us we only want to date other Trump supporters. And then it eventually evolved to non-Trump supporters saying, I don't want to date any Trump supporters. That now has shifted to women's rights, women's healthcare autonomy, right? So in 2021, the moment Roe versus Wade got overturned, suddenly we just started getting every single person telling us, I mean, we meet 40 people a week. So every single conversation when we get to deal breakers suddenly was about a woman's right to healthcare. And now it's the reality. So the reality is that there was a time when I don't know how old people are in this room, but there was a time for many of us where when you were a kid and you watched the news, there was maybe like 2 or 3 channels, right? You had like Walter Cronkite telling you the news of the day, and you just trusted that person because they were revered in their profession. And then it was your job as the viewer to come up with a solution to the problem that was told. Right now in 2025, we can't even agree on what the problems are because we're getting our news not only from legacy media, which they're trying to get your eyes, they're trying to get ratings. They're going to bring in people that have no business being in front of a camera with hateful rhetoric in front of the camera to spur. I mean, that's literally Piers Morgan's like playbook, right? And then you also have the news that you're getting from Reddit, from X, from TikTok, from Instagram. And it just puts us in these extreme silos. So as a result, like, John Gray said, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. That is not the case anymore. Now we are all on like a billion other planets, all of us by ourselves. And what's interesting in the United States is that women inherently know how to create community because we've been socialized to create community from young kids. But because the US and other cultures, many Western cultures, have adopted like a very man box culture where we teach our young boys, like, don't show emotions, boys don't cry. We have not given men the tools to like connect. And then as a result, these men become adults and these young boys become adult men, and it's harder for them to connect. It's harder for them to be vulnerable. It's harder for them to be intimate. These three things are required to enter a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of work to be done. And so the book is quite inclusive to men and also to married people, not only to remind married people, like, please date your partner. That's like really important for long-term compatibility. But I wanted men to feel like they could read this book. It's why the cover's green and purple too, because I was like, let's not make this pink. Right. Because I think men need to be part of this conversation, that there are things that we can unlearn. And then it does give really actionable advice of like, okay, here's how you're going to make in real life connections. Here's how you build a community that you can connect with. And here's how you connect.
Mm-hmm. So actually you match based on temperaments. One of the things you mentioned in the book.
If my client lets me. I have like 20% of my clients don't let me match them on temperaments, and they will always be single. What can I say?
How do you define temperament? How would you?
Dr. Helen Fisher is like a huge deal in the dating industry. So, unfortunately she passed away in September, but she's someone that I really look up to. And she is, the cultural anthropologist, biological anthropologist, as it pertains to love and romance and like why we love, which is the name of one of her books. And
she presented on LTR, by the way.
Yeah, she's an incredible person, and definitely a loss to the knowledge that we have in dating and love and romance. But when I came across that, it made for me a lot of sense, dividing people into 4 types versus the 16 of the MBTI, Myers-Briggs, or horoscopes, which a lot of people use horoscopes. Not matchmakers, just in general, people talk about horoscopes. But also, Helen Fisher's model reminded me of my grandmother's model. So my grandmother did something really similar in how she divided people. Of course, because she's Greek, she used the Greek gods. So she would call people a Zeus or Athena or an Hera or an Aphrodite or an Apollo or a Poseidon. Like, all these things meant something to match people accordingly. So like an example, a really good example is like if someone was showing the traits of someone with extreme vitality, enjoys risk, wants to travel, like, has no problem going into new situations, then those people tend to be paired well with people like them. You don't want to pair someone who's, has an extreme value of like loyalty and family structure and precedence and stubbornness and tradition. So, my grandmother would call that person, an Aphrodite, and that's who you would pair those people. You pair those people together. And that's very similar. If you look at that model, that's very similar to Helen Fisher's model, which she would call those people explorers.
Gotcha. You mentioned a few terms in the book. I'd like to unpack some of these terms, actually. I thought it might be interesting for the room. What is man box culture?
So man box culture it's a theory that talks about how young boys are socialized to be constrained into a box of what they're allowed to feel and what they're not allowed to feel. And one of the examples that I actually provide in the book is the movie The Little Rascals. And that's actually a pretty redeeming movie, because towards the end, the boys in that movie, and even in the show, they get out of man box culture. They realize that they can share their feelings, that they don't have to hate girls just because they're girls, right? Because they have the He-Man Women Haters Club. I think what man box culture does, though, is a disservice, right? Because it teaches men not to connect with each other. The patriarchy has kind of told us that, men need to be stoic, men need to be strong and exhibit these masculine and provide. Yeah. And sure, women want to date someone in their socioeconomic class, but the number one thing that women are currently looking for, since they make their own money now and they have jobs and they've had that for quite a while, is they're looking for emotional connection, of which men raised in man box culture, which is it's the majority, like way over 90%, don't fit in what women are looking for. Right? If you aren't able to be vulnerable and if you feel like, oh my God, if I show emotion, that might mean that this person thinks I'm this or whatever it is, that it not only does it make you, it like it weaponizes, it teaches. And by the way, women are also victims of man box culture, not just because of, a patriarchal system that may be unfair to women, but we are also taught as kids, well, a man needs to be strong. And if he's not strong, he's not good for you. And strength can be seen in a variety of ways. It doesn't have to be of this physical aspect, right? It's like how many women tell me they have to be, I meet women as a matchmaker who are 5'4" that will tell me he has to be at least 6 feet tall. I'm 5'11". So imagine if I said to you, I would never be attracted to someone that's less than 6'7". You
Yeah.
would laugh in my face. But it's always like,
This
well, I
is the
just want to
infantry.
feel protected. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, the two biggest risks to most women's lives in the United States is, securing your passwords and having access to hand sanitizer. It's not a bear walking down the streets of Manhattan.
Gotcha. You mentioned another term here, which I thought was quite fascinating. What is the female gaze?
Oh, okay. So to understand female gaze, you have to kind of deconstruct a little bit the male gaze. When I say gaze, Gaze, I know it sounds kind of weird, but the male gaze is what a lot of us have been raised in, to understand, like to think of like women as like objects, either to be won in movies or shows. It's a term developed by Lauren Mulvaney, and it's really obvious to me when something is in the male gaze. I think a really good examples like Megan Fox in that movie. What was the movie, guys? Transformers. It's like, what does she exist for other than here's a beautiful woman and an object? I mentioned in my book, the movie Twins. I decided to go into the vault of 1988 Twins and like how their girlfriends are not seen necessarily as like characters of the show, but they're seen as like sexual objects. I talk about in my book, the downfall. I mean, this is a dating book, but I talk about the downfall of Victoria's Secrets because of the male gaze, right? Imagine an entire company prompted over the male fantasy, but not to the consumer, people who carry boobs, right? I mean, I talk about even in the book, like I went to Victoria's Secrets upon giving birth to my kid in 2017, and they didn't sell maternity bras. That's just not something that they did. As a boob holder, that was pretty shocking for me. I'm like, what is this? What is this business for? Where am I,
Mm.
And they did come out with maternity bras in 2021, though, after like they saw that the male gaze failed their company. So what the female gaze does is, it's not that it makes now men the object. It's certainly not that, but it makes men and women like heroes of their own story, not necessarily objects to each other. So a really good example is Grey's Anatomy. Grey's Anatomy is a medical drama. It's been going on for like 20 years. But Shonda Rhimes, the showrunner and producer of that, what she has done really well is that she shows that women and men can run the halls of Grace Sloan Memorial Hospital, and no one is attacking them over their gender. Like, oh, you're a woman, so you can't do this. There are certain plots where it shows the struggle of, oh my God, I just gave birth and I'm back at work, and that's hard. Of course, that's your own narrative, right? But the women in there are not there to save the men, and the men are not there to save the women. Also, the men in that show, at no point do you ever experience the plot line of weaponized incompetence. And that's like a huge thing that you see in the male gaze. So many shows like Family Guy, King of Queens, I mean, anything, right, that we've seen tends to have this weaponized incompetence where the male character, the father figure, can't do something basic, like find the scissors in the kitchen. And they'll go to instead of looking, they go straight to the wife. Oh, where are the scissors? And it's done there's a laugh track. So we're taught that it's funny that this man needs to be saved by his wife, that a wife is okay to carry the emotional burden of managing a household and the physical burden of managing a household. Just because you take out the trash, once or twice a week is not the equivalent of someone, doing your laundry, making sure the floors are clean, dressing your kids, feeding your kids. Like that's a huge mental load, right, to take on. And so with the female gaze, and like you see in the shows that exhibit female gaze, Normal People, Fleabag, Grey's Anatomy, they showcase that like men don't need to be saved. They are full humans who can take care of themselves, right? There's no Grey's Anatomy character that's like, how do I boil an egg? And if there is a plot line like that, they're ridiculed for it. Like, why don't you know how to do this? What happened in your life that you don't know how to boil water? And so, don't get confused by by being called female gaze. It's more of like almost an egalitarian approach of like how we consume media that's more resembling of what a lot of people's reality is if you live in like an equitable household.
Mhm. You had some very interesting advice about, I love your advice about the second date, around second date.
Yeah.
So you said that basically this is the guy's job, essentially. The woman can ask for the first date, the
It's
woman
the
can ask for
one
the third date. Second
heteronormative.
date?
I know where you're
Yeah,
getting at. Okay.
yeah.
So it's like the most controversial thing in my book.
It made sense to me. It made sense to
Yeah,
me.
and it's
But
funny because the people that get mad when I say it, I'm like, tell me why you're mad. Is it because I'm right? Because no one has yet to tell me I'm wrong.
yeah,
They're just mad that this is the reality.
yeah.
So what Mark is referencing is that, first of all, men have told us, right? 84% of men have said that they would love women to ask them out on dates. So I encourage women, you want to ask out a man? Ask him out on the first date, third date, fourth date, fifth date, 100th date. I don't care. The one date you can never ask a man out on is the second date, because men know the rules. I have set up over 5,000 first dates. I'm actually closer to 7,000 now. And what's interesting is I've yet to have a man not trip over his feet to set up a second date if he was interested in going out with this person for potential.
Mm,
I've seen two things happen. Either they take forever, and that's on purpose, right? And by forever, I mean they'll wait 5, 6, 7, 10 days. And that's on purpose because they're trying to lower your expectations of them to get you on that super highway to a situationship. And that's not a place I want you to be in. I don't
mm,
want anyone to be in those if you're going to read my book, okay? But the second thing that they'll do is, like, the first option is that, or the second option is they won't ever see you again. They'll just not respond. You're done. And I think it's really important for women to know, like, men know the rules, right? They didn't get this rule book. I get it, but it's almost innate. Like, I have yet to meet a man who married someone who was in a long-term committed relationship with someone where he didn't ask out for the second date. And I'm talking it's the only heteronormative thing I talk about in my book. Everything else is quite inclusive. It's just, and I even say it, the straights are weird. I say it in the book. It's the sentence. The straights are weird. We have this thing. This is the thing. And because I know that, because I've seen it at work, right? Like, I'll set up a really great first date and I'm like, hey, when is your second date? Oh, we're talking about it. And I'm like, are you talking about it? Or like, stop texting each other. Like, have you set up a second date? I have, if he was really interested, that second date is set up within 24 hours. I'm being generous with the 3 days.
yeah,
Oh, whatever happened, I lost my phone. 3 days is generous. It's usually within 24 hours that second date is set.
yeah.
Anything more than that, anything more than 3 days, that person is not into you, but they do want to have sex with you. And they're just kind of keeping you around to confuse you and get you addicted to the dopamine and the anxiety of that spark that you had on the first date, which is
Yep.
a terrible place to be in. Don't do it. You're just going to get cortisol in your body and it's literally going to kill you. So don't do it.
I think that's a great rule. I wonder if, I think most of our online dating users are kind of get that. I think matchmakers get to underscore that. I mean, you get these questions. And on that point, actually, a couple of things I wanted to ask you. Your book is out on May 20th, is that right?
Yes, 6 days to go.
Okay, okay. And by the way, I can't recommend the Audible book enough. I really enjoyed it. Was just so much. When you can read, that's great. But when you've got someone who's actually an author reading the book, that's the trick. You want the author reading
And
the
this
book.
excitement is in the book.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You sent me the book in PDF form. It's like, I'd really like to listen to it. And then the
Yeah.
fact that you're reading, it's like, okay, I know I'm going to get. It's just a different experience when the author reads a book.
Yeah.
Any book, I always look for that. So I've got a few questions for you. I think we've got to. I'm going to ask you one question. The top question here is from Igor Ternovsky, new to LTR. Welcome, Igor. How to put together the initial database of a matchmaker. So how did you, when you first started out, how did you form, you're fresh out, you're starting your business, how did you form those initial contacts that you would match
Oh
against?
God, it was on paper. And then I realized very quickly that I can't do paper. This was 2008, 2009. So this is a very long time ago. And then but to just TLDR, the CRM that is the most effective is smartmatchapp.com. That's the most used in the industry. And they can customize it to what you want. And what I found most important in a database is like understanding how people answer questions. So for instance, I actually talk about this in my book too. Like, it's not enough to ask like, what religion are you? You have to ask, what religion were you raised?
Mhm.
And then there has to be a follow-up question of like, how important is that to you?
Mm.
Because I remember when I started out and I was like, what religion are you? People were putting atheist or spiritual. They weren't actually filling out what they were raised, which is like also like a cultural and values marker, like it or not. Right. So once I changed it in, I want to say 2012, like what religion were you raised, immediately started getting very different responses. Because the next question is, well, how important is this to you? And then that's when people can tell you their relationship with that religion they were raised in, right? And so some people will say, it's just part of my culture. I'm somewhat serious. I'm very serious, or I don't follow my religion anymore. And that changed the dynamics of like how you match. And it's an important question because it tends to be the first deal breaker when like of the things that you can search on. Similarly with age, you need to find like the SMA does a really good job of like whatever age you put in, it updates every year. And also having like age searched for your match. So for instance, if I have if a 50-year-old client who wants to date a 42-year-old woman, I want to search, okay, here are all my 42-year-old women that are open to dating a man in his 50s. Like I can
Correct.
reverse age search.
Correct.
And then the third thing that I think is really critical in a database is making it as much pull down menus and less like more quantitative fields versus
Mm.
qualitative fields,
Yeah.
because that's going to be your search engine. And that's the only way you do it. Our database has now 28,000 people. And we're constantly up. I mean, people update their profiles every day, but you're just being considered. That's all I can help you with. And then from there, we do have certain funnels for other programs that we have beyond matchmaking, because some people just need a little bit of help. They don't need a lot of help.
Mhm.
So, we'll put them in the right where they need to be.
How do you know if they're still single? Do you ask that question
I
all the time?
do. We try to every 6 months, we'll do a database audit. I haven't done it in a
Yeah.
while though, because of the book, but I'll probably do it like in September again. But we'll do a database audit and be like, are you single?
Yeah.
Should we keep you in the system or not?
Yeah.
And if they say keep you in the system, it's like, okay, we'll click this to update your profile. And if you're not, I'm going to delete you. Tell your friends.
Let me ask one final question in terms of like a question that I really need to ask that should be asked, because we're talking to you as a matchmaker. We've got a room full of, yes, there's some matchmakers in the room, but mostly it's online dating leaders. How would you love to see the matchmaking industry be able to work with the online dating industry?
I used to think that. I used to think for many years, oh, I wish an online dating site would work with me. And I've certainly, consulted with a few online dating apps, some pretty big ones, to help them understand their data. But I think now in 2025, I'm okay that we are in separate universes. I don't see online dating sites as like a lead generator for myself, but maybe
Mm.
it's because I've worked really hard to establish my own community. I have been asked by a lot of AI companies to like AI me and my IP to sell to online dating apps. So that's kind of weird because they're like, oh, you'll get paid in royalties. And I'm like, but is it helpful? Like, I don't like I think what appeals about me as the matchmaker Maria persona is that I'm an actual human being.
Mhm.
And I do show, like, if you follow me on Instagram, which many people do, like I'm not just showing off the dating stuff, I'm showing off the hard stuff too, right? Like I live with a disabled parent. I have two young kids. I have a husband who's the best guy in the world. And I show that part of my life. I'm not like a family blogger or anything, but I do showcase some parts of like, marriage is not just your dating and then suddenly you're in a great marriage. It's work. It's constant having conversations about finances and health and our parents and his parent, like, and I think that having that authenticity online, it's not aspirational, it's inspirational. And I think that's what I try to be, is a little bit more like inspiring versus aspiring, because I think it also attracts a very specific kind of follower that's more inclined to like do the things you're telling them to do,
Yeah.
which is what I hope. Like I hope that my feed, and I also hope that my book changes how people date. And it has. Like I know I've stopped counting. I think I said this to you before we got onto this. Like I stopped counting a long time ago, but I've gotten over 3,000 people engaged just from my Instagram stories alone since 2018. So forget matchmaking, just the Instagram stuff. Like, I have so many couples. There's not a day that goes by that I don't get a text message, a DM, an email, even packages from someone who got engaged to today. Like, I got one this morning at 9 a.m., proposed last night. I already posted it on my stories. And I'm like Thanos. My phone is just screenshots of people engagement photos, and I'm just collecting rings over here. That's a Marvel reference. I don't know if you watch that stuff. But, that's essentially like that's what I hope, okay, that was only through stories. Okay, now imagine with a book what happens. And I think that's what's
Yeah.
kind of like my compass here. It's like I'm ready to see intentional dating happen, because now I'll just like hype myself up now. My book is meant to be finished. There's a lot of dating books out there that most people will put away after chapter 3 because they're like, okay, that's enough for today. But my book is storytelling. So
Yeah.
you're getting all these like really funny stories or history anecdotes to like understand your own reality. And I think that that's entertaining enough to keep you, but to take you to the end, to let you know, okay, here's the conclusion. Here's what here's what it should happen if you follow all this advice. And I think that's critical in that space.
Yeah. Maria, you're a voice of great wisdom. Your book really resonated with me. I recommend everyone here and whoever sees this video picks it up, and definitely the Audible version, though.
I appreciate that.
Um,
Well, buy both because I'm trying to become a New York Times bestseller, and it's not, you
okay.
don't look at
It's nice
Audible.
to have the read along as well, and to be able to highlight. This is a
Yeah,
highlighting
you got
book
it's a
as well.
highlighting book,
Yeah, yeah. Good. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all that you are. Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you.